are in the seventh and final week of our message series for the new year. Next week, which will also be the first Sunday of Lent, we'll be kicking off a new message series for the season. Since the Archdiocese asks us to host the annual appeal at that time, in place of the homily, my associate Tom Corcoran will be offering the message after communion, according to our format for the summertime. So we hope you'll stick around for that first week of our new series. Meanwhile, we've been reflecting that while so much of life is currently out of our control, there's still much we can control. It's very tempting to focus our energy and attention on what's been taken from us, but we still have the ability to follow our own agenda under our own authority. The people and organizations, the businesses and churches who grasp this truth and hold on to it are precisely the ones, I think, who will survive and thrive through COVID. We have been talking about this in terms of our circle of concern and our sphere of influence. Our circle of concern is as big as we want it to be, but if I focus too much of my thoughts on concerns that I can do nothing about, it will inevitably lead to frustration and even fear. On the other hand, if I focus more and more on my own sphere of influence, I'm going to be emotionally stronger and healthier and probably more successful and effective. The question that we've been asking is, where do I start? And the short answer we've come up with in the course of this series is priorities. Be proactive with your priorities. And that can be a spiritual exercise too. You can set priorities inspired by faith, and ideally within a community of believers for support and encouragement. We talked about how our identity impacts our priorities for sure, and we talked about anchoring our identity in Christ. In Christ, we have the identity of beloved sons and daughters of the Most High God. We have worth because we belong to God. And so we looked at setting priority according to God's wisdom and counsel. In the course of this series, we looked at a tool we called the Ideal Week as a way of staying focused on priorities. And we talked about investing in the authority that God has given us. There are different kinds of authority. We all enjoy some kind of authority, and you should make your authority your priority. Well, as we wrap up this series, I always like to remind everyone that you'll find all 7 weeks of this series on demand on your website, on our website. Be sure and catch up on past weeks if you've missed any, and share it all with a friend. Today we're going to look at the importance of role models and community in setting and keeping priorities, and I'll give you the bottom line right up front for this message. Just to be entirely transparent, I'm talking about small groups. The goal of this message is to get you into a small group if you're not in one, or to remind you of the importance of small groups if you already have one. And to get us started, we're going to look at a passage from 1 Corinthians, where St. Paul writes, "Whatever you do, do everything for the glory of God." Paul is writing to a community of people. Who are they? Well, they're the church, the Christians in Corinth, which was a city in the Roman Empire in south-central Greece. And this community, this church, is deeply divided. Whereas in our time, in our day, it can be easy to experience division over politics or our response to COVID. In Paul's time, in this community, the deep division was over religious practices and customs. And Paul's essentially saying in this chapter, a lot of what you are arguing about doesn't matter. When it comes to religious practice, what matters is to undertake it in a God-honoring kind of way. He goes on, Avoid giving offense, whether to the Jews or the Greeks or the church of God, just as I try to please everyone in every way, not seeking my own benefit, but that of the many. So Paul goes on to say that our actions are to be tempered by the people we're around. And if you know an action will offend someone or hurt someone, then don't do it. But don't do it for a very good reason beyond just being nice. Paul's saying his goal in every situation was to bring people to Christ. That's it, period. He had no other agenda. And then Paul concludes, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. Another translation says, follow me as I follow Christ. If you want to know what it looks like to be both firm in your faith and adaptable to the situations you find yourself in, Paul says, look to me as a role model. We learn from role models, don't we? This is a lesson that became clear to me a number of years ago. My associate Tom and I were headed to a conference in Orange County, California. Tom's sister lived out there, so he brought his sons, Max and Nate, to visit their cousins while we were at the conference. Max was about 7, Nate was 3. Being around them for several days, I couldn't help but notice whatever Max did, Nate did, or at least tried to do. If Max wanted to play a game, Nate wanted to play a game. If Max wanted to drink, Nate wanted to drink. If Max told a story, Nate tried to tell the same story too. I even remember Max reading a book and putting the book down, and Nate immediately picking it up and pretending to read. Not being a parent, I hadn't previously seen this kind of dynamic, but it is fairly typical, isn't it? Little kids emulating older ones. Well, this was all kind of ironic, actually, because I mentioned this was a trip to a conference at Saddleback Church, Pastor Rick Warren's church. Early on, as we sought to rebuild and renew our parish, we looked to some of the largest, fastest growing churches to see what we could learn from them. We discovered Saddleback and learned a lot. In fact, we followed Saddleback much like Nate followed Max. Saddleback did message series, we did a message series. Saddleback had small groups, we had small groups. Saddleback opened a cafe, we opened a cafe. We had no idea what we were doing. At least at first, we were just doing it here because they were doing it there successfully. Since then, through the example of others, we've come to identify and understand our strategic anchors as a church. Our strategic anchors as a church, besides, of course, Christ himself. We call them our core 4. What we believe is vital and essential and important for the health and growth of our parish. Pastor Rick at Saddleback taught us the importance of discipleship and having a clear plan to help parishioners grow as Christ followers. Shaping a clear discipleship path is one of our strategic anchors. Another growing church in another part of the country came to model for us the importance of what we now call the weekend experience. We learned that we needed to make the weekend a top priority. It seems obvious, but it wasn't to us until we saw it elsewhere. Another successful pastor we got to know taught us the value of leadership and teamwork. We learned the value of building a leadership team at all levels of parish life, because everything rises or falls on leadership. And still another taught us the value of reaching outsiders. They emphasized that it's more important that who you reach than who you keep. And so welcoming outsiders has become one of the hallmarks of this parish. In rebuilding, it was very specifically these other pastors and churches who were inspiration and guide for us when it came to establishing the priorities we need to succeed. And the same is true for you. Without relationships and connections, you're going to struggle to live your priorities. Without guidance and inspiration, you're going to struggle to live your priorities. Which brings us to small groups. And I want to briefly talk about small groups. First of all, I want to say small groups are not Bible studies. Although in a group, you will become more acquainted with the Bible. Small groups are not therapy. Although in a group, you'll find support and care. Small groups are not theology classes or religious ed. Although if you're in a small group, you'll learn a lot. Small groups are primarily about your personal and relational growth. Growth in faith together with friends in faith. Growth in faith together with friends in faith. I like to say that the weekends here at church, you sit in rows and you listen to me. I do all the talking. In small groups, you sit in a circle and it's your turn to talk. There are opportunities for you to both be a model for others and to learn from others as well. Life is multifaceted. There are some areas of life where you can be a great role model for others because you're crushing it right now. You're a success, you're successful, and people could learn a lot from you. A small group is a place for you to share those insights relationally. At the same time, there are probably some other areas which are going less well. You can't quite figure out how it works. You haven't had that experience before. You're not exactly sure where you're at. Maybe you're a single parent struggling to relate to a teenager, or you're in your 20s trying to figure out what's ahead, or you're a busy mom juggling work life and home life. In a small group, you're going to find people you can actually support and encourage, as well as people who can be role models for you. They might be a little bit ahead of you in life. One of the privileges of my job is that I have the opportunity to see people who do life right. They just do life right. Over the years, there have been couples and families and individuals that I've come to know and appreciate who just get it right when it comes to marriage and kids, career and finances, fitness and self-care, emotional health and good humor, solid values and strong character. I've seen people in this parish who have dealt with grief and loss with nobility, faced health challenges with courage, accepted disappointments with dignity, people who are generous in good fortune, loyal to friends, kind despite difficulties. We have more than our share of all those kinds of people in this parish for sure, and that's a great blessing. But in fact, one or many of those attributes could be said about you too. And in fact, everybody who is listening to this message today. And that's why we want you in a group. We need you in a group because we want you to bring those attributes into the group life of this parish. But small groups are also important because basically we're just made for relationships. It's not good for us to be alone. Study after study reaffirms that biblical truth. When people have strong support systems, they're physically healthier, with stronger immune systems, emotionally healthier, with less stress, professionally more likely to reach their goals. And another great advantage of the relationships that you form in a small group is that they can be objective. They're relationships you form with people who do not need anything from you. They can simply be for you, cheering you on. Groups meet on a weekly basis. There are groups that meet every single day of the week, nearly every time of the day, and every kind of group: moms groups, young adult groups, seniors, men's groups. Some small groups are meeting in person, if that's important to you, but most groups are currently meeting on Zoom, which means wherever in the world you are, you can get into a group too. You don't have to live in the parish or be a parishioner. You don't even have to live in Baltimore. You don't even have to be a Catholic. Everybody can join. Everybody is welcome. The group format is pretty simple too. Spend a few minutes catching up with other members, some brief prayer. And by the way, you will never have to pray out loud if you're uncomfortable with that. The group watches a brief video that we provide with teaching presented by one of our teaching team based on my weekend message, but usually with a different approach, a slightly different twist. And then the group discusses questions we provide, and all we're talking about is 60, 75 minutes a week. It's simple, but over time it can have an impact. It can be powerful in helping you live out your priorities. So, if you're ready to learn more, find a group or find a new group, text the word group to 410-216-5534. 410-216-5534. That's it. That's all you have to do. But if you still have questions or concerns, we have a virtual lobby that you can visit after Mass. It's fully staffed with real live people to help you out and give you a hand. Well, we come now to the end of this series. We've been talking about priorities. And priorities are just about choices, aren't they? Life choices. Choosing what our life is going to be. And as we end this series, exactly where we started, we end with a simple acknowledgement. Everybody gets somewhere in life. Truly wise people get there on purpose.